What comes to mind when you think of Florida? Is it idealistic beach holidays in the sun, materialistic indulgence, wacky Florida men? Or is it torrential rain and catastrophic flooding? Florida's loved for its favorable climate, yet it's number one for the largest coastal flooding threat in the United States. Florida's low average elevation of 100 feet above sea level, which can be as little as 3 feet along the coast and 20 feet inland, puts 3.5 million people at risk of flooding. Even though Florida's home insurance premiums are skyrocketing due to all of these risks, for 7 years in a row, Florida's cities have experienced more people moving there than any other state in the US. Florida leads the United States in tornadoes per square mile, and it also experiences more lightning strikes and more precipitation than any other state, as Florida is one of the states that's most impacted by natural disasters, which has led some experts to think that its future could be doomed. Despite this, development has pushed on, making Florida the 14th largest global economy. But it comes at a cost. Florida's paradise image is disappearing. But there's a crazy plan to turn all this around. Because Florida makes a lot of money from its idealistic image, it's still the most visited state in the US. On average, visitors contribute $333 million per day to Florida's economy. Florida's booming in more ways than one, is also number one for the most invasive species, including one of the world's most dangerous creatures, which could also lead to Florida's demise. Florida men and women have been risking their lives in highly treacherous conditions as part of a growing demand for exotic animal hunters to save Florida's ecosystems. Because Florida's survival is so intrinsically tied to its natural geography. It's what makes Florida so popular. It's ranked as the best state for fishing in the country, and is even considered the fishing capital of the world. But shockingly, there are 82 fish species federally threatened and endangered in the state. These days, you can actually enjoy fishing from the comfort of your own home, and have fun catching fish virtually. Even for me, who has never been fishing in my life. This game Fishing Clash, the sponsor of today's video, has got me hooked. It's a competitive gameplay that has tons of features. There's loads of global fishing locations to choose from, such as Dubai, Florida, the Nile, a lost world, and so many more. With a huge variety of fish species to each fishery, there are equipment upgrades, and one of my favorite features is building my own fishing village. If you enjoy the competition, then you'll love their new feature, Clan Games. What's even more exciting is in 2024, Fishing Clash has become an official sponsor of the Major League Fishing. Some of the real-life events happening in the US will be replicated in the game with the same locations, where players can take part in virtual competitions and win in-game rewards. Make sure to follow Fishing Clash's Instagram and Facebook to stay tuned about the latest news. This game isn't just for fishing freaks. It's even for people who have no experience like me. I really enjoy catching rare and mythical fish. I love the graphics. It actually makes the experience way more fun than in real life. And by fishing virtually, I feel much better that no real fish are harmed in the process. You can download the game by using my link in the description box, or scan the QR code you see on the screen and use my special gift code, Leaf of Life, to get a special $20 value reward, including a unique avatar for free. New data is emerging showing there could be trouble in paradise for Florida. For the first time in 7 years, Florida missed the top of the charts for inbound migration, which had 750,000 people moving to the state. And outbound migration had risen to 500,000 people leaving the state. One reason is because of the soaring cost of living. The state also became America's second most valuable housing market. And the construction of new homes is also surging, with 212,000 new single-family housing units being built, the second most behind Texas. Florida leads net income migration, with $39.2 billion entering the state over a year, which has now become a nirvana for billionaires, since there's no state income tax, no capital gains tax, and no estate tax. When Jeff Bezos moved from Seattle to Miami, he saved around $140 million in taxes, thanks to Florida's billionaire-friendly tax code. Although some people don't believe sea levels are rising, in Florida its records are proof it certainly is there. It's affecting millions of people because in Florida, everything revolves around water, which is both a curse and a blessing for its human population. The state is known for its abundant lakes, rivers, and springs, which means it has to deal with unprecedented flooding, water contamination, coastal erosion, as well as more frequent and destructive hurricanes, often all at the same time. Florida also faces a higher risk of sea level rise from climate change. The state's rapidly rising sea levels have particularly gained widespread attention. Some 2.4 million people and 1.3 million homes are within 4 feet of the local high tide line. More than half the population of 100 Florida's towns and cities live on land below 4 feet above sea level at high tide. Florida's prevention mechanisms such as seawalls are not able to effectively stop flooding due to Florida's geography problem. Since it sits on a bedrock of porous limestone, this allows for groundwater to easily flow through the holes from below, rising at the same rate as the ocean floor. According to experts, the sea level surrounding Florida is 8 inches higher now than it was in 1950. However, the increased rates have been accelerating, and sea levels in the state are now rising about 1 inch every 3 years. 20 years ago, Florida's image might have been beach holidays, Disney World, retirement and golfing communities, but these days, Florida's image is changing. Although you might think of environmentalism as fundamentally left-wing, it's actually a right-wing administration in Florida that's been one of recent history's biggest spenders on the environment. In June 2021, the Florida Wildlife Corridor Act was signed into law by Governor Ron DeSantis in order to establish an enormous protected corridor covering a third of the state for wildlife to move freely throughout the entire peninsula.
The $300 million investment on top of the $100 million appropriation for the Florida Forever program provides Florida with the opportunity to increase progress towards protecting our lands for future generations.
Some unwelcome guests have been thriving, whilst Florida's native species are in decline, which is why this man has them in his sights, because his job is to hunt and destroy Florida's invasive species, like these Egyptian geese and iguanas. But not all of Florida's invasives can be caught like this, and one of them in particular is much bigger and harder to find. Removing them is fraught with danger, which is why this man is called the Python Cowboy. He specializes in catching the highly dangerous Burmese pythons, which have made the south of Florida their home, documenting the adventures on his YouTube channel. There are estimated to be over 1 million Burmese pythons currently living in Florida. They were introduced in the 70s and 80s as part of the exotic pet trade. They particularly like Florida's warm and wet climate, and now pythons are getting out of control. They're growing shockingly big, feeding on Florida's wildlife, with the largest captured snake measuring 18.7 feet long and weighing 213.8 pounds.
This monstrous snake is so big, even biologists once thought it was impossible.
We want to show you just how long this snake is, 18 feet.
They never thought they would find a snake that was this big.
And in the snake's stomach, bobcat claws, showing how these animals work their way up to larger and larger prey as they grow.
This graphic shows a python's potential diet of native animals and birds in order to grow to 13 feet over a 5 to 7 year period, which includes eating 4 5-foot alligators. And this giant snake was also a mother who was carrying a whopping 122 eggs. Pythons normally lay 11 to 84 eggs per clutch, and their prolific reproduction rate is taking a brutal toll on Florida's native wildlife. The python population has exploded in only 20 years, from just a few snakes at the southern tip of the Everglades National Park to an invasion that has enveloped more than the southern third of Florida and could potentially expand to the southern third of the entire United States if scientists' predictions are correct. Before the year 2000, researchers could frequently spot mammals in the Everglades National Park, but between 2003 and 2011, the frequency of mammal observations like raccoons, opossums, bobcats, rabbits, grey foxes, and white-tailed deer declined by 85% and even to 100% in some cases. But outside the python's range, those species were far more common. This is why Python hunting is an encouraged pastime in Florida. Legal hunting is permitted year-round on private land and on 32 designated Florida fish and wildlife conservation areas without requiring a specific permit or hunting license. Python hunting is open to anyone ready to take on the challenge of taking on these massive snakes. And for the last 10 years, the Florida Python Challenge has attracted big snake hunters from all over the country to an annual python hunting competition, with prize money of up to $10,000 for the individuals or teams who catch the most snakes. But there is also hope that python numbers could be reduced if there were a lot more of the state's original apex predator to prey on these unwelcome snakes. The Florida panther is one of the most secretive and elusive big cats in North America. It is also known as the ghost cat because it's rarely seen. Found throughout the southeast, central and south Florida, for thousands of years, Florida panthers roam freely throughout their territory. Hunting by early settlers and the introduction of roads dividing the landscape, followed by the dredging and draining of the Everglades to grow food, build houses, and control the water, meant that by the 1980s, hunting and habitat loss had reduced their numbers down to less than 30 individuals. 100 years ago, Florida panthers could be found roaming throughout the Gulf states and beyond. Today, Florida panthers are living on less than 5% of their historical range. Hunting them was banned in 1958, and in 1967, panthers were the first animal to be put on the federal endangered species list. But over the last decade, the panther population has not only stopped falling, it's actually slowly beginning to bounce back, as researchers are reporting their numbers are steadily increasing. In 1995, scientists imported 8 female pumas from Texas to supplement the gene pool, and 10 years later, the number of Florida panthers was roughly 200. This new underpass is being installed under a busy highway for panthers and other animals to use instead of crossing the road. It's known as a wildlife bridge, and it's connecting 2 ecosystems that have been separated for over 50 years. The number one killer for panthers in Florida is vehicle collisions, because Florida's landscape has been divided by busy highways, which has isolated pockets of wildlife across the state that are unable to move across their natural territory. However, so far 60 wildlife crossings have been created that's benefiting panthers and other species. This incredible footage shows the different wildlife that's been taking advantage of the new infrastructure. This is helping them to feed over far larger areas that are no longer separated by dangerous roads. The crossings are an important element of Florida's wildlife corridor and the ambitious plan to reconnect the landscape in order to re-establish a functioning ecosystem across the entire state. And that means bringing back the natural roaming range of the state's apex predator. Florida's wildlife corridor covers nearly 18 million acres of continuous wilderness and working lands, making up almost 1/3 of the entire state. It's crucial to the survival of many of Florida's 131 imperiled animals. 10 million acres of the corridor are already protected, while the other 8 million acres don't have conservation status, which is why the state is helping to buy up priority lands for conservation so they can expand the existing state parks, state forests, and wildlife management areas in order to reconnect the landscape. And 160,000 acres has been approved for conservation since the act was passed in 2021, which makes this corridor one of the largest landscape connectivities for wildlife projects in a high population density region. You can go ahead and download the Fishing Clash game for free and use my special gift code Leaf of Life to get your free gifts worth $20. Thank you, Fishing Clash, for sponsoring this video.